Hello and welcome to the Real World Podcast, episode 10, our top 5 films, the final episode in this series. We're talking about Raiders of the Lost Ark and Interstellar. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Real World. Today, we're talking about our top 5 favorite movies of all time. The final entries, we're finally at number 1 on each of our lists. So over the past few weeks, we've covered some other topics, but now we are back in with the top 5 favorite movies of all time, our final episode in this series. If you missed the others, they're all on the channel now, so you can go back and see them all. Returning is my buddy Bert. How you doing, Bert?
I'm great. This is going to be a fun one.
Oh yeah, this one's going to be tons of fun. We've been looking forward to this one for a while. For those of you who don't know, I don't know if we ever really talked about this, but Bert has, been with me on this podcast from the very beginning. This whole thing was actually his idea. I kind of had been wanting to start a YouTube channel for a while, and we connected over Facebook. There's a Real World group, a private group on Facebook. If you want to join that, I can add you to that group if you just want to request that on Facebook. I'll put the link in the description below. We've kind of gotten to know each other. I guess you've been on there for about a year now. Is that right?
On the Facebook group? Yeah. Probably now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we were, introduced by mutual friends via that Facebook group. I created that group almost 3 years ago. It's been going on for a while, but Bert was just a guy that I could tell was passionate about movies. He was posting a lot about different movies he was seeing. So just over time, we've kind of gotten to know each other on there. And now we are on our 10th episode of our podcast, which is pretty cool. So hopefully it's been as fun for everyone watching and listening as it has been for us. Hope you keep coming back. Please be sure to give this video a like. Just click that thumbs up button. That really helps us a lot here at the channel. Of course, subscribing, sharing the video on social media, leaving a comment as well. All of these things are going to help our channel grow. And if you want to see more from us, that's what it's going to take. So we really appreciate all the support that we've had already, and we hope that you keep continuing to support the channel here at The Real World. All right, now it's time for the final entries in our top 5 favorite films of all time list. We've been going through this list ever since the beginning of the podcast. This was kind of our first idea so that you could get to know us and kind of our tastes in movies. And now we are here at our number 1 entries. My favorite film of all time is Raiders of the Lost Ark, if you couldn't tell from the t-shirt.
If only we had a clue, right?
Right, exactly. So in the title of the video, that always gives it away. But
and the movie's
anyway,
behind you.
Right, exactly. Yes. Yeah. So I'm a huge fan of this film. I've been a fan of this film since as long as I can remember. It's one of those movies that I just grew up watching. I don't really remember a time before Indiana Jones. This one and the Star Wars trilogy, which we already talked about, have been movies that I've seen countless times. I don't know how many times I've watched these movies. First on VHS at home. I did get to see this movie in theaters when it was released for the 30th anniversary, which is now 10 years ago. It's now celebrating its 40th anniversary, but on the 30th anniversary, they re-released it in IMAX. So it was on the IMAX format, an IMAX theater I went to, and just had a blast. Went with a couple of friends, had such a great time watching it on the big screen, the biggest screen.
And quick question for you. That's a different format. So how did they accomplish that? They didn't stretch the image, did they?
They didn't, not that I know of. I don't know how they transferred it. They must
it's still a bigger presentation, even if it's
exactly. And I don't, because it was shot anamorphic widescreen on 35 millimeter, but I don't remember it looking that way the whole movie. I'm pretty sure, I don't know if they digitized it and then somehow transferred it to IMAX. And so it was the actual full screen image. I'm not sure how they did that, but nothing looked off about it when I watched it. It looked like the movie I've always known. So nice. But yeah, it was such a great experience. Just the sound quality and everything with IMAX that you get is so good. So, this movie, it's released by Paramount Pictures back in June 12th, 1981. The runtime is an hour and 55 minutes. The budget of this film is only $20 million, which even at that time was a very small budget. It was very well received by critics and audiences, ended up grossing $389 million worldwide. So it was a huge success. Of course, it's directed by the great Steven Spielberg, my favorite director of all time. I think we're both talking about our favorite directors here today. Which is true. Which is cool. And it makes sense that, they're our favorites for a reason. Our favorite movies come from them.
I will qualify though, just real quick on that. Yeah. I can't say that my director makes films in a better way than Steven Spielberg.
Sure.
But he's just, I've gravitated more toward more of his films and his filmmaking style.
Sure,
So,
sure. No, that totally makes
little
sense. Yeah,
caveat. Yeah.
they're very unique directors, I would say,
Yeah. Yeah.
and definitely have their own kind of style, for
And
sure.
standards. Yeah.
Right, exactly, exactly. Yeah, Spielberg directing this movie. He's coming off of. I've seen, I think, every Spielberg movie. I think there's only like two I haven't seen, but
Mm.
he started off with this TV movie called Duel, which was so good that they actually let him expand it and release it in theaters. It's a really small scale, intimate kind of horror movie about a guy being chased by a truck on the highway.
Oh,
Very cool movie. He also directed a movie called Sugarland Express. That was kind of his first big mainstream movie with Goldie Hawn, based on a true
oh,
story. Then he did Jaws, and Jaws is, of
yeah.
course, what made him a superstar. So he
Right.
had the huge hit Jaws. They basically let him do whatever he wanted. He did Close Encounters.
Right.
So we'll
Right.
pick up the
Mhm.
story there with Close Encounters. Close Encounters comes out in 1977. The same year, his best friend, George Lucas, released Star Wars. So they go on a vacation together to Hawaii during the release of these movies, just to kind of get away from it. They don't want to really think about the box office and if it's going to bomb. They both expected their movies to bomb terribly. Of course, Star Wars became a huge hit. Close Encounters was a pretty good hit as well. But while they're on this vacation, they started talking about what they wanted to do next, what kind of movies they wanted to make next. And Spielberg said, I want to make a James Bond movie. He was a huge Bond fan. He
Really?
really was interested in taking on that franchise or doing something in that similar kind of vein and tone. And Lucas said, don't do Bond. Don't do Bond. I've got a better idea. And he said, "What's the idea?" And he said, "It's the Adventures of Indiana Smith." And so
So
Spielberg
this is
said,
George
"What?
Lucas's idea?
This is George Lucas's idea." He had this
Wow.
idea
Wow.
actually way back in 1973, right around the time he came out with American Graffiti. He had two
Oh.
ideas. One was about a space opera, which became
Hmm.
Star Wars, and the other was about this 1930s adventure archaeologist character
Hmm.
called Indiana Smith. Uh, so Spielberg says, first of all, I don't like the name Smith. We got to change that. It makes me think of Nevada Smith, which is a Steve McQueen Western. So he's
Uh,
like, okay, how about Jones? He's like, okay, Jones will work. Indiana Jones. Let's change it to Jones. So that was kind of how it all started, just sitting on the beach in
mhm.
Hawaii and building sandcastles. They came up with this idea and decided to start working on it together. And
Wow.
so
Interesting.
yeah, so they started coming up with the outline for the script. Lucas wrote that with a friend of his, Philip Kaufman. I don't know if you've heard of him. This is a director who ended up
Sounds
making
familiar.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the
Oh.
1970s remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, as well as The Right Stuff, which is one of my
Oh,
favorite
sure. I've seen that. I've seen
space
that.
race movies. Yeah,
Hmm.
so he and Lucas worked on the story, and Kaufman is the one who came up with the Ark of the Covenant as the kind of MacGuffin of the film.
Mm.
So they had their MacGuffin. They brought in Lawrence Kasdan, who had just written was writing Empire Strikes Back at the time. Lucas was very impressed with his work on that. And so they brought him in to write the full screenplay. So, Lucas is inspired by all these, 30s action serials that he grew up on, even movies like Secret of the Incas, Gunga Din, King Solomon's Mines. They're inspired by all kinds of different action adventure films from that era. The name Indiana actually came from his dog, an Alaskan Malamute called Indian. He had a dog that he would ride with him in his passenger seat, and the dog was also the inspiration for Chewbacca. So this dog
Oh.
inspired two legendary movie characters, which is pretty fun. So they come up with this idea. They had all these kind of ideas they kicked around. They, I think, sat in a room for like 3 or 4 days coming up with different ideas for set pieces they wanted to see, action scenes they wanted to see,
Mm.
characters, those kinds of things. So these three guys really crafted the story together. Started casting. They wanted Tom Selleck to play Indiana Jones.
Mm.
That did not work out. He was already contractually obligated to make more seasons of Magnum PI at the time. So
Yeah.
that fell through. Spielberg suggested Harrison Ford, who was kind of a rising star at the time. Lucas wasn't too keen on the idea just because he had already cast Ford in all of his movies, American Graffiti, both Star Wars films. So
Hmm.
he kind of wasn't too keen on it. But after seeing him read the scenes, he knew that this was the right choice. So They brought Harrison Ford in and they started shooting the movie. The movie is made in this kind of down and dirty style. It's not really your typical polished Hollywood movie. And
Right,
the reason
right.
for that is because Spielberg, at this point in his career, he had made Close Encounters, which went way over schedule, way over budget. The same thing
Oh,
had happened on Jaws, and it also happened on his most recent film that he made right before Raiders, 1941, which was also a huge
mm,
box office bomb. So Spielberg's kind of looking to prove himself here. Not only that, Jaws wasn't a one hit wonder, but that he could come in under schedule and under budget. He wanted to prove this to himself and to the studio so that they could kind
yeah,
of trust in him again. So that's why the movie is kind of rough. It's kind of like I said, it's just not your typical polished Hollywood movie. They would only do one or two
sure.
takes usually. If they
Oh,
got it, they kind of moved right on.
hmm.
And the budget, it's not huge. It's 20 million. They came in, just under the $20 million budget. I think it was scheduled for an 84-day shoot, came in at 73 days.
Hmm.
So they ended up accomplishing all their goals. And the reason it works is I think because the screenplay is so tight and it's so well written. It's got great dialogue. They hired great producers on this. Frank Marshall is a producer on this. He was a young producer
Oh,
at the time, but he had mostly done independent films. And so he knew how to, restrain the budget and the schedule as much as you
hmm,
could. They did that. They just had great people working on it. Douglas Slocum, who's the DP on the film, he's been around for years at this point. And
hmm.
so he knew what he was doing. The editor, Michael Kahn, had already worked with Steven on all of his other movies. So he knew what he was doing. And, the stunt guys, the entire stunt team, they were kind of veterans of the industry. So they just had
Hmm.
the right people in place to make sure that this was going to go off, without a hitch. So they just did a great job all around shooting the movie. The film has such a great kind of structure to it. It's your classic kind of heroic adventure story where characters are after this, again, this MacGuffin of this arc.
Hmm.
MacGuffin is a word I think was coined by Alfred Hitchcock when he was coming up with plots for his films, and he wanted this object of desire of all the
Right.
characters, sort of the Maltese Falcon has this. Tons of movies have this. Even the recent Marvel movies, the Infinity Stones are kind of this
Sure.
MacGuffin that they're all
Right, right.
after. So has that great kind of structure to it. I could give my commentary on the entire movie, but I'll try to just hit the highlights. So the opening shot of the movie, I really like. It's fading out from the Paramount logo to a mountain which resembles it. They had to find this mountain where they were shooting. They were shooting those opening scenes which take place in South America and Hawaii.
Hmm.
And the producer, Frank Marshall, actually, it was his job to go find a mountain that looks somewhat like the Paramount logo that we can fade into. So they ended up finding it.
Interesting.
That's their opening shot. We get a very romantic kind of introduction to Indiana Jones. He's kind of in shadow. We don't really see him the whole time. One of his guys that's helping him on this journey. I like also that the opening scene is kind of the end of another movie that we haven't seen, right? It's kind of just
Right.
dropping us in. He's
Yep.
already on this adventure looking for this idol.
It's like the end
And
of that
so,
adventure. Yeah.
yeah, exactly,
Hmm.
exactly. So
That's
one of
true.
his guys kind of pulls a gun on him, and he whips the gun out of his hand real quick, steps into the light. He's got this great, introduction that I really liked. Kind of a mysterious character, which is always fun to be introduced to a character that way. And there's all this implied history throughout the film. We don't really get a whole lot of exposition of explaining backstory of a lot of things or characters. It's done in a way that's just very natural feeling. It doesn't ever feel like, you're talking to the audience or talking down to the audience in that way. But there's this implied
Yeah.
history, even in his opening scene. He talks about this character Forrestal. This is where Forrestal cashed in as he's about to enter this cave. And this entire opening sequence does a great job of, it does three things, which every scene should do in a movie, especially action sequences. It should inform you of what's going on in the plot and the characters. It should engage us in what's going on, should be, engaged in what's happening, and it should entertain us, and we should be having fun. So all of this does this action reveals the character of Indy without him. Again, they're not explaining a backstory. It's all just, you're just watching this unfold. So this opening action sequence where he's kind of entering this cave very cautiously, it tells us a lot about him. It tells us that he's intelligent. He knows what
Hmm.
he's doing. He knows where
Right.
he's going. He's also resourceful. He can kind of adapt to any situation. and he's also determined, so no matter what kind of booby traps are set off, he's still going to the prize. It's not going to stop him. He's probably my favorite fictional character ever, just because he has the brain and the brawn, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's one of these guys that is a very intelligent guy. He's a doctor of archaeology, professor, and he's also a man of action. He's going to take action. He's going to do what it takes to collect these rare antiquities that he's after.
Yeah, and if I can throw in something there.
Go ahead.
I think it was Harrison Ford we were talking about recently on Air Force One, where it's kind of similar. Like his moves are intelligent, and he can take action, but you don't get the feeling that it's like nonsense, like him doing like a bunch of karate. Was it him we were talking about that is like that?
Yes, it was. Yeah,
it was.
Yeah, it was. We were talking about that last
week.
He's
the same here. Yep. And it is very, he's so good at it,
He is. And that's funny that you bring up the karate thing. That was one of Lucas's ideas, was that, he'd kind of be able to do anything. He'd be almost superhuman. Like he can do karate. He's got, he's more intelligent than anyone in the room. He's and Spielberg was the one that pushed back on that. He's like, no, he needs to be more of an everyman. He needs to be a little more relatable.
I'll let you carry on, but yeah.
No, yeah, you're totally right. No, feel free to interject. Yeah, that's great. That is definitely an important aspect of the character. Mm-hmm. Another thing, actually, now that I'm remembering, that they wanted, Spielberg was the one that wanted him to be a little more worldly, a little more like Humphrey Bogart in like Casablanca or something, where he's kind of just not a great guy, not a guy that you really like. He wanted him to be kind of a gambler, a smoker, a drinker. And Lucas is the one that pushed back on that and said, no, he needs to be a role model for kids. Kids are going to go and watch this movie, and he doesn't need to be that unlikable. Mm-hmm. So I thought they struck a perfect balance of all that. He is a little bit of a scoundrel. He's kind of a grave robber in a way, if you think about it. But he's very likable, and you definitely you understand where he's coming from. So the opening sequence is just one of my favorites in movie history. All these booby traps he's going through, collecting this idol, the giant boulder, all the whole thing. And he's got this buddy with him, the kind of last guy that's in this, obviously for the money for himself. Mm-hmm. Satipo. He's played by Alfred Molina. Right. This is Alfred Molina's first role.
Is it?
It is. He was a theater actor in England where they were shooting this. They cast him in the role, and he just does a great job. He's really good in it. He's kind of funny. He's kind of silly. He's freaked out by a lot of things that happen, and makes a great foil for Indy in this sequence, and ends up betraying him. Like I said, he kind of steals the idol, throws the whip away, and ends up getting his comeuppance very quickly.
Well, you can't cut that thing in half, right? So one
exactly
make it out.
Right. Yes, one of them has to take it. So he ends up taking it. But what I like about this opening scene is it kind of encapsulates the whole film in a way, because, we get to know who Indy is very quickly. We get this great action sequence. We get to know, how smart he is. And then at the end of the scene, he doesn't make it out with the idol. Belloc is there waiting for him, and he takes it right out of his hands, And so Indy is a guy who, again, he's determined no matter what, but it doesn't always go his way. He loses sometimes, He's a very vulnerable hero. He gets hurt. He gets beat up, and that's another thing that I like about him. And Paul Freeman as Rene Belloc, a British actor playing a French character, but he just does a great job. And he even mentions later in the movie that he's kind of a shadowy reflection of Indy himself, this other rival archaeologist who's just a little more self-obsessed, self-centered, more in it for the glory and the money than anything else, whereas Indy sees these as rare archaeological finds that he wants to preserve for posterity, and he gives them to this museum run by his friend Marcus Brody. So he makes it out by the skin of his teeth in Jock's airplane. They take off, and we also set up in the beginning that he hates snakes. So the opening of this movie is just such economical storytelling. They're kind of setting up all these little things for later in the movie. All the characters are there. Even Belloc, is there, our villain. So they just do a great job just in the opening 20 minutes. It's kind of a little movie unto itself in a way. Little Easter egg on the airplane. The side of the airplane says OB3PO or OBCPO, which is a reference to Obi-Wan Kenobi and C3PO from Star Wars. So gotcha. Steven did that for his buddy George. And George Lucas, by the way, shot a lot of second unit on this movie. So a lot of the action sequences were actually directed by Mr. Lucas himself. This was when he was between making Empire Strikes Back and
Oh,
Return of the Jedi, which he didn't
okay.
direct either of those, but he was heavily involved in the production of each one.
True.
But he
Yeah.
got to kind of get on set a lot for this one as well. We then cut to Professor Jones, and I'm not going to go through the whole movie, but I just wanted to set up this as well. Professor Jones, right? So we get to see him now in a different setting, kind of a Clark Kent persona in a way, where he's kind of on the weekends, he puts on the fedora and the leather jacket and grabs the whip. And then during the week, he's kind of just this professor in these glasses with a bow tie and teaching these
Yeah.
students. So I like that aspect
Me
of
too.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Denholm Elliott as Marcus Brody, kind of the older, wiser mentor figure in this
Mhm.
movie, does an excellent job. He introduces him to the Army intelligence, which kind of sets him on this mission. Now, the scene with the Army intelligence meeting him at the Marshall College is really interesting because it's basically an exposition dump, which we don't like in movies, but they do it in a really interesting way. Steven always has a cool way to do these scenes, and he does it through the visuals, right? So they're in this big auditorium, this lecture hall, and they've got this chalkboard. So Indy draws out the staff of Ra, and he kind of is explaining all these things to him, opens up the big picture Bible and shows him a picture of the Ark itself, and all of that set up there, and it's very well done. A good, exposition scene only lasts a little under 5 minutes. They mention a lot of important aspects of the story here as well. Abner Ravenwood, who's this new character that's introduced, he's going to have to go after. They also introduce, like I said, the MacGuffin here, the Ark of the Covenant, explain its history, what it is, what it does, that kind of thing. And Hitler was obsessed with the occult. This is documented fact that he was kind of obsessed with tracking down these ancient artifacts that he thought could have held supernatural power,
Oh,
anything to help him gain a foot up in World War II. So this is, in a way, based in historical fact. And they do a great job in the next scene. It's one of these long one shot takes, a oneer, where Marcus walks into Indy's house. He tells them they want you to go and get it. And we see Indy packing his suitcase. It's all done in one long take. And then it finally cuts when he throws his gun into his suitcase. So I like those shots like that. Spielberg is usually pretty subtle about it. I don't think you would really notice it unless you were looking for it, but it's really well done. And we get the same thing when we're introduced to Marion in the next sequence. So Marion is in this drinking game with this big Napoleon character, and they're ready to drink each other under the table. And it's all done in one long shot, going back and forth between the two. Everyone's betting on who's going to win. Marion, of course, ends up winning. And it's just a fun little scene to introduce us to her character. We kind of get who she is right off the bat. She's kind of a tough lady who's not going to take anything from anybody. She socks Indy on the jaw as soon as she meets him. And you get this whole history between these two characters, complex kind of relationship there.
and once
And
again, we're
so,
dropped in. They've got all this history, and you can tell there's tons that's happened to them, but we just sort of drop in the middle of it or whatnot.
yes, exactly. I
Yep.
love that. Yeah, yeah. It's all
I
given
like
to
that
us,
too in
and
movies. Yeah.
yeah, and subtle dialogue and just how the characters interact with each other. And then that sets up our next big action sequence, this big shootout in the bar. They burn down the bar. We're introduced to Ronald Lacey as a character named Arnold Tote, who's kind of this Gestapo character, really creepy villain. He does an excellent job in this as well. Next, we're on to Cairo. We're introduced to John Rhys Davies as Sala, who's this great kind of comic relief character, really important to the story. And he brings a lot of humor. He does a great job playing this role. I like at the end of the movie when Marion kisses him farewell and he starts just singing this,
Right.
tune. It's a lot of very, very good character stuff. You just really get the
Yeah.
idea that these are real people. They just feel real and relatable.
Sure. Yeah.
And all the actors just do a phenomenal job. So in Cairo, we have this great set piece of the swordsmen who are all chasing after Indy and Marion. They're all kind of running through the streets and this big, fist fights and everything. And then we get, might be my favorite moment in the movie. The crowd kind of disperses and we see this huge swordsman flipping his sword around and they're ready to have this huge confrontation. You don't know what's going to happen. They had actually planned on an entire whip versus sword battle that these two were going to have in the city. And Harrison Ford was sick on the day. Actually, a lot of the crew
Oh,
got sick while they were shooting in Cairo. They actually shot that in Cairo.
Oh.
and they got food poisoning. So Harrison Ford feels terrible on the day they're supposed to shoot this big battle, and he says, "Look, I've got a gun. I should just shoot this guy, right? I mean, I don't need to fight him. Why am I fighting this guy?" And Spielberg's like, "All right, we'll try it. See how it plays." And of course, he pulls his pistol out and shoots him, and it's probably one of the most famous scenes in the whole movie. It
Yeah,
just
yeah,
works
it's a
out
great
so
moment.
well, such a great moment.
Right.
And again, it just makes sense. You know, he's not gonna mess with this guy when he knows he has a gun on his side. So
Right.
it just works so well. One thing I'll mention about the gunshots, the whips, the punches, that's all Ben Burt. Ben Burt worked on all the Star Wars movies. He's the sound designer in this movie.
Mm.
He's just a genius. I mean, the guy comes up with such distinct sounds. And this
Mm.
is not how punches sound. When you punch someone, it doesn't
Yeah.
sound like a, you know, but it's
Right.
so iconic. These noises that he
Yeah.
came up with, they just sell it. You know, they really make it again just distinct and unique.
Mm-hmm.
Another shot that I really like is Indy in the map room. So he finds the map room, they get the staff, and the light comes down and shows you where the Ark is. And it's just a
Right.
scene with just images and music. And John Williams' score, of course, I can't go without mentioning that. It's iconic, definitely one of his best, if not his best. Such a great adventure theme, and then a romantic theme that he has with Marion, and then scenes like this are just kind of awe-inspiring, where we're just getting these shots of the map room and the light coming down, and it's just all music and images together, and it works so well. John Williams really outdid himself in this one. I thought it was really well done. Soon after this, we get probably my favorite shot in the movie, which is Indy and the whole crew he's gathered digging up the Well of Souls. The shot of the sunset, and it's Indy putting his hat on, and it's kind of silhouetted against this backdrop of all these diggers, and it's just a phenomenal looking shot. Again, Douglas Slocum did all the cinematography, and he's just one of the best. He ended up shooting all three Indy movies.
Mm-hmm.
We get a great scene that was actually improvised, where Marion is seducing Belloc. The scene was basically her trying to escape, and there wasn't really a whole lot of dialogue written for it. So Karen Allen and Paul Freeman kind of went to their trailers and started working on it themselves.
Mm.
What could we talk about? You've had this drinking scene earlier. Maybe we could make that play into it. And they worked it out themselves. The actors actually came up with that entire
Wow.
dialogue between those two characters, and it works really well. We get a great gag of Tote coming in with this device. We don't know what he's going to do with this. It's like got chains on it, and he's like putting it together, and they're kind of getting freaked out. I think it's some kind of torture device, and it's just a coat hanger. Hangs his coat up on it. Little things like that I just think are clever, that they can
Yeah.
come up with, that just make it injects humor into it
Yeah.
right when we need it most. So
Right.
coming up next, we get the Well of the Souls. Indy is kind of thrown in there with all the snakes, which we set up he hates
Right.
snakes.
Right.
Ford actually is a huge fan of snakes. He was handling snakes on set himself. He
Did
has
they
no
did they
problem with
burn
it.
snakes on that movie, by the way?
I didn't hear about any burning snakes. I know that
It kind of looks like they do, but I mean,
yeah,
probably not.
I
But
don't think
they
they
didn't have the
did.
same standards back then than they do,
I
compared
don't
to what
know
they have
what the
now.
standards were, but I from what I
Yeah.
understand, all the snakes were safe, and they
Oh,
actually had to
okay.
bring in a
Okay.
lot more snakes, because
Uh-huh.
they had, I think, 1,000 or 2,000 snakes. They ended up needing like 8,000 or something. It was just the set was too big. They had to
Oh,
have more snakes,
gotcha.
and a lot of the ones around the edges are rubber. They're just fake rubber snakes.
Sure. Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
ones up close, they had to be real. Of course, the famous scene where he drops in and the cobra snaps up and
Mhm.
hoods up in front of him. There was a piece of glass in front of Ford, but that is all
Oh,
in
really?
camera.
I
Yeah,
was
that is
wondering if it was a puppet because I thought, wow, they made that look real.
no,
You know?
that's a real snake. Yeah, they put a piece of glass in front of it, and
Oh, that
you
would
could
still
actually
be scary.
tell on the VHS
Oh,
that it
really?
was glass. There was a little smudge on the glass that they
No.
actually ended up taking out. Now you can't tell
Oh,
for
beautiful.
the HD release, because in HD you could really obviously tell that it was glass.
Yeah.
You had to kind
Yeah.
of look for it on
Okay.
VHS, but it was there.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
they ended up fixing that, which is good.
Yes. Yes.
So we get that whole sequence. They escape the Well of the Souls, and then we have this big fist fight next to this airplane with the German mechanic, which is a really cool sequence. This was a stuntman who had actually played one of the bad guys earlier in the movie, who died in the bar fight. Well,
Oh, and he
the
came
real big
back.
guy. Yeah, he was
Hey,
used
Cameron.
again. Yeah. So yeah, then we get this big fist fight with the big German mechanic, who is actually a bad guy back at the bar fight as well. They reuse the same stunt guy. And so he's fighting Indy. A couple of great moments there. He makes him look at his shoelace and all this different stuff he's trying to do to just survive. Basically, he knows he can't beat this guy, so ends up getting torn up by the propeller, and he and Marion make it off. Then he's got this great moment where he says, Sala tells him it's being loaded onto a truck now, and he's like, all right, I'm gonna get on that, get that truck. And he's like, how? He's like, I don't know, I'm making this up as I go. It's just a great moment that again alleviates some tension and kind of shows you that how resourceful he is, because he's just making this up on the fly. He's just trying to catch this thing as quick as he can.
And it's nice for a hero to not always have the answer. And,
yes, exactly.
I mean? Yeah,
right. He makes him so much more relatable for the audience if he's done that way. So then we get what I consider the greatest action sequence in cinematic history, which is the truck chase. So he starts on a horse, gets on the truck, and has to fight this whole truckload of Nazis. All these other cars and vehicles are around him. He's running them off cliffs and into the trees and all this other stuff. And it's just such an exciting scene. Every second of it, I can't look away, because even though I know what's going to happen, I have to see, is he going to make it through this? How is he going to make it through this? Ends up going under the truck at one point, and just incredible stunt work. Really, I mean, incredible. No CGI again. They weren't doing this stuff. They weren't faking it. They were really doing it. And so it's just such a well-crafted sequence, really good. And it was one of the first ideas they had for the movie when they were coming up for different ideas for what they could put their hero through. And of course, it all culminates in this, they go get on the boat. It's being loaded onto a submarine. He goes to this island where they're going to, open the Ark and see what's inside and how it works. And there's this great little moment again, when he gets on the island, finally, he's sneaking around and he has to put on one of the German uniforms. And the guy he beats up and takes his uniform, the uniform's too little, doesn't fit him. I just thought that was a great moment. I've never seen anything like that in a movie where they have things like this happen to our heroes. I just thought that was a really clever moment that they came up with. Again, nothing's easy for Indy. It always is a difficult challenge ahead of him that he has to kind of come out on top. They end up opening the Ark. Of course, the power of God is revealed against the Nazis, and they're wiped away in some very grotesque ways. We see face melting, and we see heads exploding and things like this. So great effects work on their part to make all of that work. And still today, it looks great.
Like,
yeah, right. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's very, very inventive and creative, and they do a great job with it. Ultimately, our hero does get the Ark. He does get the Ark back to the United States at the end of the film, and he's asking these Washington guys, "Where is it? What are you doing with it?" And they're not willing to tell him. But he ends up back with Marion, and she assures him that everything's going to be okay. I know what they don't know what they've got there, is what he tells them. And she says, well, I know what I've got here, implying that their relationship is really what matters, and them kind of reconnecting at the end of the movie. Also, his belief in the supernatural. He thinks it's a bunch of, hocus pocus. He tells Marcus at the beginning of the movie, he doesn't believe in the power of the Ark or anything like that. And by the end of it, he's definitely a believer. He's seen it. Well, he hasn't actually seen it. He closes his eyes, but he knows what went down there, obviously.
Yeah.
And then that great final shot of the Ark being pushed into this warehouse full of boxes that the government is keeping. Who knows what's in all those things? But great final shot. Actually, we end up finding out what's in some of them at in Crystal Skull. They return to the same warehouse.
Oh, really?
Okay. Yeah, at the beginning of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, they return to that warehouse in the opening sequence, which is pretty cool. But yeah, all in all, it's just a movie I get such a kick out of. Just watched it, got the 4K for Father's Day, and it looks great. Nice. It looks excellent on the 4K format. And it's just one of my all-time favorites. Everything about it, it's just a perfect movie, in my opinion. My favorite of all time. So this was the first time you've seen this movie this week, right?
That's right. Yeah. 41 years later or whatever.
Right.
First time I've seen it.
That's right.
And real quick, I wanted to tie into, you talked about Indy being somewhat of a Tomb Raider, or whatnot. But he doesn't intend to I mean, he doesn't insist that he keep the Ark or anything like that. Like he goes through that whole thing, and he, acquiesces to people that can responsibly take care of it, I guess.
Right, right. He does.
So,
He does initially tell Marcus when Marcus says you have they're going to let you go and pay for the trip or whatever.
mhm.
And he does say, and the museum gets to keep it, right? He's kind of real more worried about his friend's museum than anything else. And that's kind of
Yeah,
probably why he was a little more upset at the end that they didn't let him
yeah,
keep it in his museum. But yeah, he does
right,
kind of just let
right.
it go. And
Yeah. So, flashback to early 2000s. There
okay.
was a game that came out for the PC and probably other formats. I don't know, but it was called Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine.
Oh, I've heard of this. Yeah.
And that's actually, I've spent actually a lot, many dozens of hours playing that game.
Oh, cool.
And that's been most of my exposure to Indiana Jones. Now, I
Interesting.
have seen, yeah, I've seen Last Crusade probably two
Hmm.
or three times, but the last time was definitely probably early to mid 90s.
Okay.
I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, I like that
I
one.
had never seen Raiders. It's one of those that I'm sure it was on TV at some point in the 80s,
Yeah.
but and this is part of what has sort of created this mentality with me of older films is that the 80s you get it on TV, the square format, usually poor
Right.
quality because it's an antenna signal, and
Sure.
movies just looked so bad,
Yeah.
on replay. Like there was no HD, or
Yeah.
most of the time there wasn't even the correct aspect ratio. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
Right. Right.
that's why a lot of these older films I never really went back and watched. I'm glad I went
Mm.
back and watched this one. I will
Good.
say,
Good.
yeah. I feel that Raiders is a real fun adventure film. Where they're seeking treasure or what have you.
Sure.
I talked before about Harrison Ford. You can't imagine anybody else in this kind of role.
No.
Ford has just this way of just making a role his own,
Yeah.
and you don't really, once you see him in that role, you don't really want anybody else to be that.
Yeah.
It's just
Exactly.
incredible.
Sure.
Karen Allen, I had seen her in Scrooged and really liked her there.
Yeah, she's great
She's
there. Yeah.
a lot different in this movie, and I
Right.
liked her in this.
Yeah.
Um, so that whole first scene, it's like a 7-minute scene, of them
Yeah.
trying to get the treasure and the spikes and the traps and all that kind of
Right.
stuff. It occurred to me when I watched Raiders. So that was 1981. That's really the template, I think, for any other movie or video game that has tried that kind of thing of treasure hunting and then there's
Yep.
traps, because I think that's been repeated in lots of other places.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And I don't know, is that the first that you know of somebody? I mean, there must be some older film, right, of somebody doing something like that, or not so much?
Yeah. Yeah. Like I mentioned, Lucas was inspired by 30s and 40s serials that he watched,
Okay, yeah.
movies. King Solomon's Mines is one of the big ones.
Did that do that kind
And
of thing?
yeah, they did similar stuff where
Oh, did
he's
they?
going through a
Okay, okay.
cave with a torch looking for stuff. Yeah, so it's not the first
And
time
there's
it's ever
traps and
been
stuff.
done.
Yeah,
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 yeah, yeah, yeah. So, but
right.
this is what popularizes it for modern audiences for sure.
Okay,
Because not a
okay.
lot, I mean, nowadays no one's seen those serials from the 30s. I mean, you can't even really find them anymore, unfortunately. But
Yeah,
yeah, for modern audiences, this is definitely where it all
yeah,
started. I mean, Romancing the
right.
Stone,
Yeah.
The Mummy, we mentioned
Lara
National
Croft,
Treasure. Yeah, sure. Yeah, exactly.
Tomb
All
Raider.
that stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's even a scene in the '80s Doctor Who, where I think it's the episode The Five Doctors, and there's very similar kind of thing where there's
Mm,
this room and there's traps set up and all
yeah.
that. I think it was around the same time. I'm sure they lifted it
Sure.
from this movie. But
Yeah.
Jonathan Rhys Myers, I think that's how you say his name. Yeah, he's always
Rise
funny,
Davies.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, I've seen him, Rhys Davies.
Yeah.
I've seen him in Sliders. He was great throughout that, the TV show.
Okay.
Obviously Lord of the Rings. I
Oh
mean,
yeah, Gimli. Yeah.
tall man, right? And plays,
Very tall.
they're called dwarves in
The
the,
dwarf. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
right. And so he's always great.
He is.
Brings such a robust performance to everything he does, at least what I've
Hmm.
seen. I wanted to talk about a couple of my favorite moments in the film too. You
Sure.
mentioned it, but the scene where the airplane is turning, it's not too often that you have a moving vehicle, but it's not going anywhere.
Right.
you
Yeah.
know,
Exactly.
and
Right.
and so and people that have watched this are probably like, yeah, duh, I can't believe you haven't seen this before. But I'm sorry, I haven't seen the movie, and it's pretty sweet set piece where they're trying to avoid this plane that's sweeping around, and it just adds sort of a huge extra element to what would normally be a standard series of fist fights or whatever,
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
obviously that's a great scene. There's a really funny gag where Indy is hurting and he's sitting on the bed, and Marion comes over and flips that big mirror and smacks him in the face. I
Yes.
first time I seen it, I burst out laughing. That was
I
pretty
love it.
hilarious. It's
It's
funny, the
great.
cut on that is a bit odd. They don't really leave much room for laughter, and I'm not really sure why. I think they just wanted to move on, but
Yeah, it's a very fast-paced movie. Yeah, the
yeah,
humor, yeah,
yeah,
even the
yeah,
humor, like it kind of just moves at a pretty quick pace. But yeah, they hit
right.
him, and then I think there's an establishing shot of the boat where you hear his yell, and
Right.
then they cut
And
right
they don't,
back in.
yeah, and they move right on, which is
Right.
fine. But it was
Yeah,
really
yeah,
pretty
yeah.
funny.
Yeah.
Um I want to comment on John Williams. You know, I feel like way back I kind of discredited him a little bit, and I feel bad for doing that. I've been
Mm,
hearing more and more of his scores, and he is very good. You know,
yeah.
I feel like I'm just going this. I think it's the second time I've gone back and said I probably discredited him a little bit too much. His score is very good here. I
Yeah.
do want to say though that as a casual Star Wars watcher, because I don't get into it much, I'm
Sure.
more of a Star Trek guy. You know,
Yeah.
John Williams, his theme for this movie, the da, 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 obviously it's very
Yeah.
iconic.
Sure.
I listened to a little bit of the music because there are times when there's not a lot of dialogue and things like that. So I tried to listen to a little bit of the music, and to me, when I close my eyes and it's something going on that's not a major moment in the film, a lot of the background music, it sounds to me a lot like Star Wars. And
Mm,
I don't really mean that as a criticism,
yeah.
because really John Williams has a lot of sort of sweeping strings and horns and things that move around a
Yeah.
lot
Right.
and in all different directions. So it's not bad, but to me,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of hard to differentiate indie at times from Star Wars with the music. Again, not in
Sure.
the big moments, not where it really kicks in.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But fortunately, it doesn't really matter because unlike a lot of scores that are just kind of dull, just kind of hanging out in the background, he does have a lot of, like I said, sort of sweeping arrangements
Yeah.
that sort of dance around and make it interesting. So
Definitely.
it's not really a knock, but I just wanted to point that out, that's kind of what I picked up from it. So it is a very
Sure.
good score,
Yeah.
obviously iconic main theme. So the tone, it's interesting looking back. I feel like or 80s were a different time because there's a lot of sort of kid oriented material that there's moments that it would be pretty scary for kids back then or even now.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I feel like Indie is a great movie for kids in some ways, and I harp on this a little bit, but I don't know that children under 7 wouldn't be terrified by certain things that happen in this film.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I guess that's what I'm
Sure.
trying to get across.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear
So
you.
and then I will say, you know, the car chase scene, the lengthy one,
Mm,
it's about 7 minutes. I went back and
mm.
actually watched it again to see, and it is great because there's all kinds of things happening. I guess I feel like a modern scene would be a little tighter with, you know, like some of the punches you can tell they don't really land and stuff like
Right.
that. I think
Right.
that's again, I've talked about this before. It just kind of goes to the sophistication of the time. It didn't necessarily need to be like super precise, you know. So I don't want to knock it
Right.
for that. But
Yeah.
again, I guess I prefer the flavor of something that feels more like it's, you know, really hitting and really
Yes.
connecting. But that said, there's a lot of fun that happens in that scene.
Sure.
It's amazing that they pulled it off
Yeah.
practically, you know.
Yeah. Right.
I saw one point where I'm like, how are they? Oh, I think it was when someone's being dragged, and then I
Mhm.
realized I think they slowed it down to about half speed, or I'm sorry,
Right.
back up,
Sped it
back up.
up.
They sped it up to
Yeah.
my brain does that sometimes. They sped it up to twice the speed, and
Right.
I didn't catch it until right before they cut it. And I
Yeah.
thought, oh, I think you kind of get away with that because
Sure.
for one thing, you don't want to drag any stunt man or any
At-
person, you know, for
yeah.
any length
45
of
miles
time,
an hour.
especially, yeah, that, yeah, exactly. So I do love the fact though that everything's practical. If you can make a good, fun, entertaining film that holds up to 2022 with practical effects that still stand,
Yeah.
right? No CGI. Is there any green screen? Do you know?
I think there's a couple of instances of a green or blue screen.
Okay, I didn't really
One,
notice any.
yeah, one
But
when they dig up the well of the souls and
mm,
the clouds come out in the sky and a lot of lightning behind them. It's
mm,
very brief. It's a couple of shots, but
okay, I
it's
could
I
see
think
that.
yeah.
Yeah. But at no point do you get the feeling of, oh, like even in Air Force One, I was talking about the very end, it's like
Right.
that's definitely a green screen. It's not the
Yeah.
greatest, a
Right.
couple
Right.
decades later, but not in
Sure.
this film,
Yeah.
so kudos
Right.
to, everybody that was involved in this.
Yep.
So if you want, I got a couple questions as I was watching it that I observed that maybe you can answer in addition to the ones
Sure.
I just asked.
Sure. I just wanted to mention real quick
Yeah.
about, I was just thinking about, kids being scared of this movie.
Yeah.
That's
Mhm.
a great point because yeah, it is, you have to know your kid, right? You have to know what they can handle, what
Right.
they can't handle. I've always felt, I watched this movie when I was pretty young, definitely under 10. And I've always thought that kids are a little more resilient than we give them credit for. And when you're showing a young child a movie, I think that's the safest environment for them to experience fear. And I think
Sure.
that's actually an
Yeah.
important thing as children are developing. You want to kind of expose them to things that they aren't going to see in their everyday lives necessarily,
And help them
because
understand it. That's a good
help them
point.
understand it. and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
when they do experience fear in their real life, they can kind of
Mhm.
handle it a little bit better, in my opinion.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point.
I'm not a
Yeah.
psychologist or anything, but this is just my own understanding, my own
Yeah.
experience.
Sure.
My parents showed me quite a lot when I was fairly young. And again, these are PJ movie. They wouldn't show me anything R-rated, nothing too grotesque. But I do remember being scared of this, the face melting scene and things like that. But I think I'm maybe all the better for it because again,
Yeah.
just experiencing that kind of thing in a safe environment,
Yeah.
knowing also that it's not real. What you're seeing on
Mhm.
that screen is all make
Right.
believe.
Right. Right.
Those are all, I think, important aspects to remember when we're
Yeah.
trying to figure out what we show our kids, because we're talking about that now. We have, two young daughters. So,
Sure.
but all of those things are important to talk about.
Yeah,
So
that's a very good point. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Anyways, go ahead with your questions you have.
So about 4 quick questions. About the 114 mark, when there's a bunch of skeletons falling on Karen Allen's character, Marion. Why do they make a hissing noise?
Well, there's a bunch of snakes in there. That's already been established, and there is a
You think
snake.
it's the snakes?
I
Maybe
think it could be, or it was just to make it more scary.
I think it was to make it
Because
more scary.
that scene
Yeah.
is it's a little silly. Like watching it, it's kind of like, what's going on here? Why are all these falling on her? And I think it's kind of almost played for laughs in some ways, watching it back. But
Yeah.
no, I think
so.
it is. If I had to explain it in the universe, it would be that there's so many snakes in this place. They're just, the whole place is always hissing.
Yeah, that's true.
It sounds.
Yeah.
When I was rewatching it, I had it cranked up pretty loud, and I was like, I think there's some screaming going on that's not Marion. I think there's like the skeletons are screaming here or something.
That's what it feels like. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But somewhat for comedy. Yeah.
Right,
I agree.
right.
I agree.
Yeah, yeah.
Second question, at about 117, Indiana's in the fist fight with that man. We talked about that.
Right.
He's got a hammer. I think I wrote down here.
Oh yeah, the wrench. I think he's got a wrench. He's swinging.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
They're outside and they're in front of the airplane.
Right.
And the propeller is spinning.
Yeah.
The hammer gets put, or whatever the thing is he's got wielding, it gets pushed into the path of the propeller, which disarms him. Not takes his arm off, but disarms him.
Right.
So that would be that's a very dangerous stunt if they really do that. Any idea if they were actually filming in front of a spinning propeller?
I'm pretty sure they were. I from what I know, they did not have any. Again, no effects for the propellers. This was a real, I don't know if it was a real actual functioning airplane, but those were actual propellers on set. Yeah, because I've seen behind the scenes footage of them doing that. So yeah, I think that was just a very dangerous stunt that they went ahead and.
I don't think they do that these days. You know what I mean? And that's why it's good. That's why it's good, because now they'd say, oh, we'll have a way so that you're not actually in any danger. Well, you know what? It's a little more intense when there's actual. I mean, you
can feel it,
but
you can feel it. I mean, they totally would have just done it digitally nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it just, the propeller wouldn't have even been there. It would have had maybe a wind machine going or something and make it look like the propeller's going, but he just stuck his hand back there and dropped it or thrown it or whatever. And, or the wrench itself may have been CGI. They CGI the whole thing or whatever.
Exactly.
But it makes it so much more tense, when you can tell it's a real thing.
It does. Another one, also at 117, when he's about to fight that big bald guy. So he proceeds to kick him in the balls, bite his
Right.
arm, and then he throws sand in his face.
Yes.
And it's great because it's sort of like this catch-all of all the dirty tricks to do to
Right.
someone when you're fighting them.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
that just kind of shows, like you mentioned, resourcefulness.
Yes.
I don't have a question. I just think it's funny.
Yeah,
So
it is funny, and but it is one of those things that reveals character, right? So
yeah,
it's Indy. He doesn't care about fight. This German guy, he just wants to fight. You can tell
yeah,
he's just like,
right,
come on, I
right.
just want to fight. I just want to fist fight. I just want to box somebody, you know. And Indy's like, I got to get
Right.
out of here. I don't have time for this. So he's pulling
Right.
out every trick in the book.
Literally, yeah, yeah.
Dirty as they may be, to get
Right.
rid of this guy, and he ends
Yeah.
up going in the most gruesome way, and you don't even see it, right? That's what's cool
Yeah.
about it. You just see the blood
Which is
splatter.
good. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very
Yeah.
effective.
It is.
Yeah. Again, little kids, what is all that blood?
Right,
Oh,
right.
nothing.
Don't
Probably
worry
a
about
bird
it.
flew by or something.
Yeah.
Lastly, when they open the Ark, how does Indy know to close his eyes? He seems to automatically know to do that.
Yeah, so this is shows that he's also a student of the Bible. Actually, if you look back in the book of Exodus, when you're dealing with the Ark and all these things, when anyone has an encounter with God, it says that you are not to look upon the face of God or you will die.
Gotcha.
And so Indy knows this. And so Indy says, don't open your eyes. Whatever you do, just don't look. Yeah. As long as we don't look at the face of God, we'll be okay. And
yeah, I feel like he gets a sense of it. Like he's looking at first and he's like, you know, this isn't true. It doesn't feel right, is the look he gives to me. Yeah.
Yeah, it could have been instinctual, but there are actual passages in scripture that he could have read and said, okay, if we don't look, then we should be okay.
Right. And what if you had sunglasses on? Do you get a pass? Or if you're squinting?
I think another thing that has to do with is the fact that these are all Nazis. Yeah. And there's even that scene in the boat where it's the Ark is in this crate and it burns away the Nazi logo.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think it has a lot to do with the fact that these are really bad guys that are oppressing, you know, Jewish people specifically. Yeah. And that probably had a lot to do with it.
Those are the questions I had. You know, I think I'm right at about 3.5 stars for this film.
Okay.
And it's not a bad film. I'm sure there's plenty of other people that give it 5 stars.
Sure.
I prefer something a little more modern, like National Treasure.
Okay.
Which is probably, you know, sacrilege to some people, but you know, as far as the entertainment value, I enjoyed it very much.
Good.
I'd say 3.5 stars. Yeah.
I'm glad you gave it a very positive review. That's awesome. I'm at full 5 stars. This is a perfect movie. I wouldn't change a thing about it. I've watched it an infinite number of times and will continue to in the future. So really enjoyed it. Glad you liked it. I'm really glad.
Yeah.
Really glad.
Yeah, it was good.
All right. So that is my number 1 favorite film of all time, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now we're going on to Bert's number 1 pick. What is it, Bert?
My number 1 pick is Interstellar.
All right. You've even got the Blu-ray.
I do. This film had an incredible impact on me. I'm sure as much or more than any film I've ever seen. This film deals with some pretty difficult to digest subject matter involving families, you know, and I for my background, I picked the the father, and in this case his daughter, because that's really what the story is about. There's other sci-fi stuff, interplanetary stuff that's going on, and that stuff's great, but it does come down to the emotional impact of that. And I can tell you that from some life experiences that I've had, this movie just hits like a hammer. That's the only way I can really describe it. There's one scene in particular, and I want to talk about this this Blu-ray that I got a few years back. I don't know if it was specific to, you know, Best Buy or one of these, but it's got this outer sleeve and it says free inside, a collectible IMAX film cell. And I thought, oh, that's pretty neat. Whatever. I'm probably gonna get like the end credits, right? That's gonna be my film cell. Would they do that to somebody? That'd be kind of rude.
That would be rude. I don't think they could.
So there's a scene in the film which is probably about the most difficult for me to watch, and it's when Matthew McConaughey's character Cooper has to get in his pickup and drive away from his home, leaving by his devastated daughter. He's crushed. He can't believe he's doing this. He doesn't know what he's in for. It's so significant. And I don't know if they do this for every one of these that they sold. But this film cell that I got from the IMAX print is a still image of him in that exact moment. You can't see it because it's not lit up behind it. But it's him in the truck crying
Wow.
and just reacting to that. It's that exact, like if I could pause it and said, this is one of the, toughest moments to watch. This is
Yeah.
literally it. So I have
Wow.
not looked into it, but that's the film cell that I
Wow.
got. So,
That's
and I could take it out, but it's obviously the 70 millimeter
yeah.
film cell. Yeah.
That is
So
so cool. Wow.
yeah. So I don't
That's
know if it's
great.
coincidence. Maybe they
Yeah.
did it for everybody. They're like, yeah, they'll just reprint that same
Right. Right.
thing. I don't know, but
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
though, yeah, those moments in the film just hit me really, really
Mm.
hard.
Yeah.
It's hard for me I don't love to watch this movie with other people
Yeah.
because I can't always I can never keep it together when I watch this
Yeah.
movie.
Right. Right.
So obviously huge impact on me.
Yeah.
The biggest part for me is the music in this film. And as much as
Mm.
I love the story and the sci-fi stuff, which is good
Yeah.
too,
Yeah.
but the film score, my favorite composer, Hans Zimmer,
Yeah.
and this music for me, it's in a completely different category from every other film score I've heard. I've listened to the score. I'm not kidding, hundreds of times.
Wow.
I used to fall asleep listening to the music because it was just
Wow.
so beautiful.
Yeah.
If people haven't heard it, I'd strongly encourage someone to just listen to it independently, even of the film.
Right.
As much as I love the film, I actually probably love the music more. And so,
Wow.
as you can imagine, the marriage of those two,
Yeah.
are just it just takes me to a place that no other piece of media can take me when I
Wow.
watch this.
Wow.
That's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So a few other things that are great. The scientific accuracy. The
Mm.
executive producer is Kip Thorne. I have no idea how.
Right.
He's I'm not neuroscientist. He's a astrophysicist.
Yeah. Right. Right.
And I have no idea how well he's accepted in the astrophysicist community,
Sure.
but he seems to know what he's talking about. But he
Yeah.
was clearly an advisor. I mean, he appears in the special behind the scenes stuff,
Yep.
talking about the movie, and he specifically advised on what a black hole would look like, and it's
Yeah.
different than what most Hollywood movies or all Hollywood movies had shown before,
Right.
and this kind of thing. So the accuracy of it, I mean, obviously there's a little bit of fiction in there, but yeah, it's definitely on point with the scientific accuracy, which I like. Like I always point to the films where there's an explosion in space and it makes this noise.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, we know right now that that's
Wouldn't
not going to be
happen.
accurate because there's no sound in space.
Right.
I will say, Star Wars Episode 2, I think there's that scene where Obi-Wan is being chased and he's in some kind of like oblong looking ship. And he's being chased, and there's some kind of explosion. They shoot at him, and he goes through an asteroid field.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
it makes this really weird sound, and it's
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a place for those kind of effects and that kind
Sure.
of thing.
Sure. Yeah. It would be
Uh,
Star Wars would be very boring if there was no sound in all the space battles.
Exactly. Yeah. Definitely. This Interstellar challenges me. It doesn't spoon feed everything to me. Now I do like the ones where I can shut off my brain. I love the disaster films, and that kind of thing. I love those a lot too. But this film, it's very layered, like most of Christopher Nolan's films.
Yep.
Every rewatch, I tend to get rewarded with something new. The writing I feel is great. These people are in this very dire situation where everybody might die, and I feel like their reactions are not like, this isn't a happy movie.
No.
This is we no longer have most of the luxuries we used to, and we're just trying to figure out what to do next. I mean,
Yeah.
the writing though of the characters, I feel like what they say and do feels really real in the
Yeah.
if you were in that situation.
Right.
The cinematography is great. The visuals are great. They employed a lot of miniatures, and Nolan, he's going to try to make the CGI as invisible as possible. I don't feel at any point that I think the CGI fails or looks poor. So
Right.
that part's great. The science fiction is really expounding on existing theories of science. So there's
Mhm.
very little that's just made up. There might not be anything that's just made up.
Yeah.
Like the planets they go to, they're very similar to Earth, and
Sure.
that makes sense. And there might be something like 1,000-foot waves, but
Right.
but otherwise, or so the planets feel very real.
Yeah.
Instead of making them very, very foreign places. Not to say those
Right.
planets might not exist.
Yeah.
The robots in the film are there strictly for utility. They don't have a
Yeah.
face. They're not meant to
Right.
be warm and fuzzy
Yeah.
things that
They do have a good
that-
sense of humor, though.
they do, and that's sort of the counter to that is that Matthew McConaughey in the behind the scenes stuff, the director was saying, Nolan was saying that McConaughey's the one that sort of came up with the idea of calling the robot Slick, and making those sort of
Right.
probably Texan references, I guess. I
Right.
don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And playing off of the robot more like that.
Sure.
I mentioned the locations, the
Mm.
glacier that they have for Man's Planet, the
Yeah.
frozen planet,
Yeah.
was in the middle of, I forget now where it was
I think it was
filmed,
Iceland, right?
Alaska. Oh, it was Iceland. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
Iceland.
Yeah.
And they actually had to build 10 miles of roadway just to get to the location. So to where this amazing, so
Wow.
it's not a CGI set. It's a real place,
Yeah.
and I think that's really neat. I mean, a lot of directors don't have the resources to
Sure.
do that though,
Sure.
but I enjoy that. Yeah, some of the sets, like the ship itself, was on a giant gimbal. Nolan, like with Inception,
Mm.
it
Right.
has this giant set which can be turned and moved and that kind of
Yeah.
thing, and that's just kind of crazy,
Yeah.
uh, that he puts in all that just for
Right.
for a film set.
Yeah.
And So yeah, real quick on the cast here.
Mm.
McConaughey, I think he gives like an Oscar worthy performance. I don't think he got nominated. I like him as an actor. In addition to that scene, like the film cell scene that I have where he's driving away. I mean, there's
Right.
just like the scenes of him reacting to the video messages that
Yeah. Mm.
his children have sent to him. And
Yeah.
first, he's probably shocked at seeing them be 10, 20 years older.
Right.
And then the messages themselves are either
Mm.
grim or
Yeah.
worse than that. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Right.
And just
Right.
so
Yeah.
he definitely goes there pretty easily as an actor because it's just very believable. So I want to mention too, Nolan, I think in the past could be accused of not using enough women in roles.
Mm.
Here we have Mackenzie Foy is the actor that plays she's 10 years old. She's already lost her mother,
Yeah.
and now she's faced with losing her father
Mm.
for some period of time, but she definitely
Right.
doesn't want that to be any time at all.
Yeah.
She's really great here. She's
She is.
fantastic.
Yeah.
And then the grown-up version of her, Jessica Chastain,
Yeah.
she's terrific. It's heart-wrenching to see her leaving these messages to her father
Yeah.
because she thinks he betrayed her too.
Mm-hmm.
She's so good that when I see her in other movies, I just want to give her a hug.
Yeah. Right.
She's so good.
Exactly.
Anne Hathaway's good here too. It's probably
Yeah.
my favorite role I've seen her play. I wish she was given even more, but the bottom line is there's a lot of good, strong female characters, and that's always
Yeah.
good to see.
Sure.
Michael Caine has sort of one of the biggest twists in the film,
Yeah.
which I won't really get into, but that's really good.
Yeah.
And then Matt Damon, he's one of my favorite actors.
Yeah.
I don't love seeing him in sort of an adversarial role, but
Right.
he's so good. And
Yes.
yeah, Topher Grace too is good here. I like him as an actor. I wish I
Yeah.
could see him in more movies.
Yeah.
So the reason why I like this film so much is probably not going to have the same impact for everybody as it does for me, but those are the things. I think I have a couple more things to add, but I want to get your thoughts on this film.
Yeah, this is a great one. Released back in 2014. I saw it in the theater. This is,
Mm,
I mean, Christopher Nolan's still at this height of just, you have to go see his movies. I mean, because you never know what he's going to do next. He's always going to be innovative in some way and tell a story that you've just never seen or heard before.
right.
And this is definitely no exception. This is coming on the heels of his Dark Knight trilogy,
Right.
of mentioned Inception,
Mhm.
and all these just great movies that he's made. And it's a long movie. It's almost 3 hours. It's 2 hours and 49 minutes long. Had a budget of $165 million, huge budget.
Mm.
Ended up grossing over 700 million.
Oh wow.
And he's got this kind of I guess you could say a negative connotation with some of his movies. For some people, can be a little cold, where he's a little bit too into the ideas of the movie
Mm.
rather than the emotion of the characters. But this
Mm.
totally blows that out of the water. I mean, this is a great balance of the two, right? So it's this
Yeah.
crazy, insane sci-fi idea,
Right.
but with this very human story, very much a character-centric, emotional tale that's being told. He does a great job with the entire thing. I mean, I think he just directs so well. All of his cast, you mentioned so many of them already, but I'll also mention a very young Timothy Chalamet, who's kind of become a big star recently with Dune as the young Tom, his son.
Mm-hmm.
And then Casey Affleck playing the
Mm-hmm.
older version of Tom, I think also does a great job.
Yeah. Yeah. he does.
John Lithgow is in there as well. He
Right,
does really
right.
good. The actress, her name is Ellen Burstyn,
Oh, sure, yeah.
plays the older Murph, and
Hmm.
she's phenomenal too.
Yeah,
I like how
yeah,
he frames the thing. We start off with this kind of like documentary interviews of these,
yeah,
very elderly people talking about how the world was when they were younger. And, I thought that was a great framing device that
yeah. And
I
by the
don't
way,
think,
Cam,
yeah,
do you know that that's from an actual documentary?
I don't
Like
think, is it?
those scenes are actually borrowed from a documentary about the Dust Bowl or something like that.
Oh, I was one, you know
Something that
what?
occurred in, yeah. And so
I was wondering about that when I
yeah, I
was
think,
listening. I was like, I was going,
mhm,
this sounds like these are real experiences about like the
yeah,
Dust Bowl or something. I actually
yeah.
went through my head
So
when I was watching.
did it? Yeah, because if I'm right, I think he literally took scenes, certain select moments from that a
Wow.
documentary about
Yeah,
that, and moved them into his
that
film.
makes so much sense. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
that's
which
great.
is not something you often see.
No, definitely not.
Incorporating it into a fictional movie. You know what I
Right,
mean? Which is
right,
interesting.
exactly. Yeah, that's cool. So yeah, he did a great job just kind of framing the story. I like that, but also he doesn't, again, doesn't do these exposition dumps where it's talking down to the audience, explaining. Most movies there would be like opening text: the world has run out of food, there's blight across the planet. They would do all that stuff that, or a newsreel or something. Oh,
When
the
Roland
the
Emmerich was directing,
exactly,
and I do like him. I
exactly.
do like him, but
I
yeah,
like him too, and he does a fine job with
yeah,
those movies. I'm not.
yeah,
It's nothing
different
against
style,
them, but it's just, yeah, it's a
different
different
style.
style, and it's
Right,
treating your audience as if they're very intelligent and they're going to be able to catch up and figure all this out. And
right,
so I just
right.
really like how he does that.
Hmm.
Building this world out through subtle dialogue and through what we're seeing. That's just the visuals. Does a great job with all that. Coop as a character, he's such an interesting character because he's, this former pilot who's now had to kind of become a farmer, doesn't really like farming. It's kind of just out of necessity that he's doing it.
Right,
And,
right.
he's very much kind of that kind of dreamer character who's kind of
Hmm.
looking to the stars, that kind of literally, but
Yeah.
he's doing that thing where he kind of doesn't want to be where he is, and he's kind of just stuck in the
Hmm.
situation. His daughter is a lot like him. His son is not like him at all. His son is very
Right.
much all about, I love farming, love to do this. This is
Hmm.
what I want to keep doing the rest of my life. And so there's kind of that disconnect between him and his son. You don't get that there's a bad relationship there, but
Hmm.
there's just kind of a distance there. You can kind of tell.
And then,
Um,
that's true to life too.
yeah,
Often there's a child that gravitates toward one parent or the
right.
other, or is more like the parent's shadow compared to one of the other children.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, it's very, very true to life. Absolutely. But I like that he's got this kind of attitude of, he's kind of staring the apocalypse in the face. They're basically living in
Hmm.
the apocalypse. And he still
Right.
wants to go to baseball games. He still wants to do things with his daughter
Hmm.
that's like fun. And,
Right.
he's very hopeful in that kind of way.
Hmm.
As a character, I think. And so, yeah, like you said, McConaughey just knocks it out of the park. He does an incredible job here. And they set up so much of the movie early on that you just don't realize, right? It
Hmm.
had been a long time since I'd watched this. I watched it
Mm.
again in theaters. I got the Blu-ray, probably watched it a year after it came out, and it's been on the shelf, I think, ever since.
Mm. Yeah.
And so putting it back in this week was really cool because I had forgotten a lot of things. I had kind of remembered the bookshelf thing. I was like, oh, yeah, that
Yeah.
ties in to the end of the movie. But it
Uh-huh.
was so cool to watch it again and just get all those things that they're
Yeah.
setting up that you don't really get. You're like,
Right.
what is even going on here? I don't really understand
Right.
it. I don't know why
Right.
they're
Yeah.
even what's going on, but it's so
Hmm.
clever, every aspect of it. And Jonathan Nolan, Christopher Nolan's brother, is a writer
Right.
on this, and he writes a lot of his movies. They kind
Yeah.
of co-write a lot. Nolan is very involved, but his brother just does a great job with his screenplays. He's a really intelligent guy.
Yeah, he
Um,
does.
and so, you mentioned the robots. I definitely wanted to mention them. Such a unique design
Yeah.
that again, you mentioned it's all utilitarian. It's just all
Yeah.
for its usefulness. And
And if you were in that time, you wouldn't care about what face it's got. You'd say, "We got
no,
this technology. We need some help from these robots.
right,
Here's what you got."
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they did a great job. Like I mentioned, bringing in the humor. He's like, I think he says, my humor is currently at 90%. He's like, let's bring that down to 75. It's a little
Yeah,
too
there is a lot
much.
of humor in this film, I will say.
There is,
And
yeah, and
yeah.
that's another thing Nolan gets accused of, is not being good at comedy in some of his movies. But here
Uh-huh.
again, he proves them wrong because he just nails it here.
Yeah.
Bill
Yeah.
Irwin voices Tars, the one of the robot, the main robot.
Yeah.
and he does a great job with it. They do a lot of cool stuff here. Again, you mentioned the wormhole, that it's a sphere.
Yeah.
All these things that are these sci-fi elements that it's so unique, again, because they researched it and they tried to figure out how would it really look. And they just did an excellent job, again, with all the visual effects. They used a lot of these that's being used a lot nowadays. He kind of, I guess, pioneered this, these LED screens where it wasn't a whole lot of green screen in this film. There were these LED screens they would surround them with so they could actually see outer space, looking out the windows of their spaceship.
I watched stars. I saw a featurette on, I think, The Mandalorian's using that technology.
Exactly.
Right?
That's right. Yeah.
The
Mandalorian's making it so that, I mean, their whole show is on a set, basically.
Gotcha. Yeah.
They do some on location stuff, but most of it is on a set surrounded by LED screens where they can make the environment whatever they want.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's film quality. Yeah, that's pretty sweet. Yeah.
It is. It's really cool. And Nolan did a lot of that here. And you can tell just because of the way the light is interacting with when they're in the spaceship on their helmets.
Yeah.
I don't
know how they do all that. It's incredible. Yeah.
It is. It's just outstanding. Cooper, he's obviously, we've talked about it already, this scene where he's faced with this impossible decision. He now knows that there's the space mission. He's kind of the only one that can pilot it, and he has to leave his family. And it's just such a well done scene. So just putting yourself in his shoes, that kind of, again, that impossible decision to make, of leaving your family behind to save humanity, to save all of people, not just your children. And that's ultimately what drives him on this quest, is that he realizes his children may not have a future unless he goes and does this. So just so well done. I like the use of the poem by Dylan Thomas, Rage Against the Dying of the Light. That's used a couple of times in the movie, and it's very, very well placed where they place that poem. It's a really good poem, one of my favorites. Another cool design that I thought was the hypersleep chambers.
Oh yeah, those are neat. Yeah,
very unique design for that. The way the water comes in, they're kind of in these like Ziploc bag kind of things,
body bags or something. Yeah. And they don't seem to be worried about that at all. I'd be like, can I have about 1 minute before you zip that up?
Yeah, it's like
they don't even do that
on
the
inside too.
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
All that's really well done. There's a shot when they first get into space. It's just one of these shots where it's an image and music, and it's the spaceship going across Saturn, and it lasts for quite a few seconds. This shot, there's this long shot of Saturn, and then they kind of zoom in and you see the ship, just this tiny little ship going across Saturn. And it's so well done. It's so cool to see how small we are, right? It's that whole idea of the vastness of the universe that we'll never comprehend fully.
Right.
And them just this little tiny spaceship going across on this
and you
journey.
Need that because if you see the ship in space with no perspective, it doesn't even look like it's moving. So
right, exactly. Yeah, really well done. You mentioned the cinematography. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Hoyte van Hoytema, who's shot many of Nolan's films, including Dunkirk and recently Tenet. He's a really talented guy. He did another space movie I like called Ad Astra with Brad Pitt.
Oh, I like that. I need to rewatch it because I kind of forgot most of it. But on my first viewing, I did like Ad Astra. It was decent.
It's very interesting. Yeah, I like that movie. Yeah. And it's, again, just very well shot. The visuals are incredible, and he does a great job. You already mentioned the great Hans Zimmer, who's just, like you said, one of the best. I mean, he really always, again, is one of these guys who innovates with the kind of instrumentation he used. I noticed a lot of organ in this one, which I thought was interesting. I haven't really heard him use that before, but it was very effective.
Because it hasn't really been used in films. Maybe
back in the 30s, it was like in old horror movies is what it reminds me of. But
they wanted to use something that was not used often because they're dealing with otherworldly things. So
it was very well
done. They
done.
went to this cathedral in England and had this guy play it on this gigantic, organ with the pipes and all that.
Wow.
So that's where they filmed, where they recorded those pieces. Yeah.
That's really cool. Another thing I'll mention about the cinematography is the shifting aspect ratio. He shot it widescreen 239 by 1 aspect ratio, most of it on film. He's another one of these guys that likes film. He doesn't really shoot digitally. But then he goes to IMAX in several sequences.
Uh-huh.
And he's a huge proponent of the IMAX format, of the theatrical experience. And I don't think I got to see this in IMAX, but I imagine it would be really amazing because even
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
my screen here, I have a
Hmm.
55 inch, and it just looked incredible. I mean, when it would
Yeah.
open up into these, full
Yeah.
screen sequences of the wave sequence that we mentioned, or a lot of the stuff that's in space, or
Docking
on
and
these
stuff. Yeah.
planets,
Yeah.
yeah, are on the IMAX format, and it just looks really cool. And
Yeah.
it didn't ever really distract. Sometimes it's distracting for me when it's
Mm.
shifting a lot, but
Mm.
here he
Yeah.
did it for like full sequences. It would be
Yeah.
IMAX, and then
Yeah.
it would go back for
Gotcha.
other scenes. And so that was really tastefully done, I thought. All in all, I just really enjoyed it. There's a couple of other moments I'll mention. The elbow rockets I thought were cool that they used a couple times when they're on the planet trying to get to
Hmm.
places. I was like,
Yeah,
man, they
those
should
are
have used
cool.
those more.
Right.
So
Right.
those were pretty neat.
There's kind of a fight with those, essentially using those.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was. Yeah, a little
Yeah.
tussle that they have when they're using those. I liked that. Things like the frozen clouds that they like kind of bump into one
Yeah. Yeah.
briefly. I'm like,
Yeah.
what a cool idea,
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
thought, man, that could be like a whole action sequence. You have them like dodging the clouds and trying to figure out which ones are frozen and which ones aren't.
Yeah. That's true.
So I really liked that. Just little things like that, little details that I
Hmm.
thought were really interesting. There's this one of my favorite sequences in the movie is there's this they're cutting back and forth between man fighting Coop, and
Hmm.
Cooper's helmet has been cracked,
Hmm.
and Brand is having to rescue him, while at the same time on Earth
Yeah.
Murph is burning the crops and trying to save
Right.
Tom's
Right. Right.
family, trying to rescue
Yeah.
his family. I thought that was a great sequence where they're
Yeah.
building tension so well between the two,
Uh-huh.
cutting back and forth. The music is just intense, and the editing is
Yes.
just so good.
Yeah. That's
Uh,
that's true.
I
That was a
thought
good
that
choice.
sequence was a really stood out to me as just being a very well put together sequence.
Yeah.
They do a great job with ultimately all the reveals, which we don't have to get into too many spoilers if you don't want to, but all the reveals at the end of how this
Yeah.
all connects, what's been
Right.
going
Right.
on.
Yeah. I didn't really
Uh,
mention all that. Yeah.
yeah, we they because several times I couldn't remember it exactly what was going to happen. They mentioned them a lot. They put the sphere there. They
Mhm.
did this for us. I'm like, is this movie about aliens? I don't remember aliens in this movie, because that's what it kind of seems like. They're kind of building
Yeah.
towards like there's going
Yeah.
to be this reveal of all these aliens have done all this for them to save
Right.
humanity or something, and that's not what it is. And it's such a
Right.
cool reveal at the end
Yeah. Yeah. For
that I
sure.
really liked.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll mention is the final scene. The scene that always makes me tear up at the end is when Cooper finally gets back home and he's on Cooper Station. And he's like,
Hmm.
"Oh, that's nice." And they're like, "No, we didn't name it after you. We named it after your daughter." He's like, "Oh, okay."
Right.
And he finally
What has
gets
she
to
done?
right, yeah, exactly. And we finally get to see her, and we see
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
reunion. That's the scene that always gets me,
It seemed
because
very
it's
improbable, but they do make it back. Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah. Against all odds, they make it
Right.
back. But she's on her deathbed. And it's
Yeah.
just a really touching moment. And we
Yeah.
see her whole family is there. All these people are in
Mhm.
this room.
Right.
So we just get to see that, she lived a good life. It all
Yeah.
turned out
Yeah.
okay in the end for her.
Right.
And he gets to go back and be with Brand too, which is a great kind of conclusion for I think both
Mhm.
of those characters.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just great. It's one of those movies that we talked last week about blending spectacle and truth, and this movie definitely does that on
Right.
every level. It's just incredible to watch. It's incredible to experience. Just again, emotionally, very satisfying conclusion to the whole thing,
Hmm.
and it's all done very well. They mention, kind of the thesis of it is that love is not quantifiable. It's kind
Hmm.
of exceeds all scientific explanation, and it's ultimately what helps them win in the end.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, really enjoy it. Really enjoy
Yeah.
this movie. It's so good, so good. One
Yeah.
of Nolan's best for sure.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and I just had a couple more things. The score speeds up throughout the film. I didn't know. I didn't even notice
Hmm.
that until I watched some of the behind the scenes stuff. But
Hmm.
as time becomes shorter, the score speeds up a little bit, and
Okay.
it's very subtle.
Yeah.
So I want to mention that, which is interesting.
Yeah.
I'd kind of like to see someone break that down to see when it happens, and maybe
Right.
some YouTuber will do that
Yeah, I'm
or has
sure.
done it.
Yeah.
This is obviously not a happy film, but I would challenge anybody to watch this and then not come away from it sort of reprioritizing
Mm,
and appreciating their family
yeah.
after watching it. We started this top five journey. I believe we started off by indicating this isn't necessarily the film we watch the most. Like, I don't pull
Right.
this out every 3 months and watch it.
Right. Yeah.
I have to prepare for it
Yeah,
sometimes,
exactly.
but
Yeah.
I cannot name a better film, and so that's why it's at my number one.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great reason. And I didn't get into so much my reason for Raiders. I mentioned that I grew up watching it, which
Mhm.
is one of the main reasons. It's just a movie that's always been there for me.
Mhm.
But I think the reason it's my number one is because whenever I think of the word movie or movies or film, I think
Mhm.
of Raiders
Yeah, there
because
you go.
it's
There you go.
pure escapism.
Mhm.
That for me is kind of what encapsulates film. And
Yeah.
but it also definitely deals with themes, I mentioned his belief in the supernatural and this kind of thing, these kind of subtle underlying themes with it as well.
Yeah.
And just, great characters, and it's just fun. Movies
Mhm.
for me, the number one thing I'm looking for is fun and entertainment.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
so that's ultimately why I think Raiders is stands above the rest, because
Yeah.
I can't think of any other movie that I'm more entertained by. While it's
Mhm.
on, I'm just locked into it. I'm laughing at all the jokes. I'm kind of just got a grin
Yeah.
on my face the whole way through it.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's my number one.
Yeah. I did want to ask you, what is your star rating for Interstellar? Obviously, mine's 5. But what do you have on it?
Yeah, I just watched it last night, and I actually haven't done a letterbox for review for it yet
Mm.
because I'm really close to giving it 4.5. It was already at 4, so it's already a great review on it.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a great time watching it. I might bump it up to 4.5. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
really, really good filmmaking. Like I said, definitely one of the best Nolan films. I still think my personal preference is slightly for Inception,
Mhm. Yeah.
which
Inception's great
again,
too. Yeah.
Inception tells another very emotional story,
Yeah.
with great characters, just so
Yeah.
visually
Yeah.
innovative what they did in that
Right.
movie. So I put it, but right up there with that and Dark Knight. Those are kind of my
Right.
top three Nolan movies.
I get that. Sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Nice.
All right, folks. Well, that concludes our top 5 films list. Wow, we've done 5 of these episodes, and each one of them has been really unique and really cool to just see, Bert, what you like, and you can get to know me better, what I like. Our audience can do the same thing. So, hope everyone has enjoyed these, and we will be back next week with an all new episode. We are going to be covering Thor in the MCU. So the new Thor movie is out this weekend. We're going to be reviewing all of his films throughout the MCU. So be sure you return for that. Thank you again so much for joining us on this journey. Hope you'll continue with us. The Real World, again, is on Facebook. If you want to join that group, we're also on Twitter and Instagram. If you want to follow us there, those links are in the description below. Be sure you give us a like, hit the subscribe button, hit that bell to get notifications. All of those things greatly help the channel grow. And the more we grow, the more watch hours we get, the more subscribers we have, the more video content we can give you. So thanks again, Bert. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. It's been loads of fun.
Absolutely. And we'll see you guys next week. Thank you so much for joining us right here on The Real World. We'll see you next time. All right. So that's it for us here on The Real World Podcast, episode 10. We're already 10 of these in, and have now finished our top 5 films. We've done all kinds of other podcasts. We did patriotic films recently. We've done a Tom Cruise podcast, Doctor Strange, all kinds of different ones. So be sure to check those other episodes out. Be sure to give this video a like, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell to get notifications. Be sure to follow us on social media. All those links are in the description below. And we will see you next time right here on The Real World.